In 1967, a small town in West Virginia was devastated when a bridge connecting Point Pleasant, West Virginia to Ohio collapsed and many people were tragically taken. However, some people believe that the town was warned by an unknown entity. This is the strange and terrifying story of the Mothman. Hey up weirdos of the internet, my name's Repulsive Artichoke and welcome back to the world of weird. This is going to be my first full episode on this channel because my previous episode, which was Embalmed Alive, is essentially my, let's call it a pilot episode because, you know, there wasn't much I could investigate into it, but I also didn't want to overwhelm myself the first time that I was recording because I am a massive introvert and this stuff is definitely a little bit intimidating, let's put it that way. Over here, I take a deep dive into things from cults to cryptids and just the dark side of humanity. I wanted to start off my first cryptid episode with my absolute favourite of all cryptids. I don't know if you can tell, but it is all about my beloved Mothman, and I even have a tattoo of him on my leg. I would show you right now but I am currently wearing yoga pants and they are not easy to roll up to show my leg, but I will add a picture in here provided editing Artichoke remembers to do that. And as well as my tattoo, I also have a part of my bucket list which would mean me going to West Virginia to visit Point Pleasant and go on sort of like a Mothman tour and do the whole Mothman experience, because I'll tell you more about it later, but there is also a lot of events that go on in the town with Mothman, but we'll get into that further later and you'll probably be able to see why I want to go. I was planning to try and have this out a little bit sooner because it's been, at time of recording, about 3 weeks since I put out my Embalmed Alive video. However, life is always chaotic for me. I'm not gonna lie. But between me having a tooth out and a member of my family not being very well, and it also being hotter than Satan's gooch here in the UK, it's taken me a minute. So hopefully the AC isn't going to mess up my audio side of this, because I'm not used to the recording end of this, so setups for me are not easy. This is my boyfriend's it's in my house, but it's my boyfriend's streaming setup. He just has it here because he's here on a weekend and that's the best time for him to stream. So if you are actually into horror games, please do go check out my boyfriend's work. I actually edit for that channel and I do mods for the streams, so I am always over there in the streams. But I will link his channel at the end of this video if you want to go check him out. But enough of my rambling, let's get into the amazing story of the Mothman. Just to add, I do apologise if I'm looking over here a lot. It's just the way that everything's set up. I have my notes over one side and the camera's in an awkward spot, so it's hard for me to look at the camera and read. But just bear with me while I get used to this stuff. This weird story begins on a cold, dark November night back in 1966. Two young couples were out on a double date driving around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, when they passed a former munitions plant. As they passed, the couples noticed a large black creature stood at the side of the road with red glowing eyes. They described this creature as a 7-foot muscular man with wings that span up to 10 feet. However, they couldn't fully identify its face as they felt hypnotized by its glowing red eyes, and they felt they just couldn't look away from the creature. Eventually, they start to speed away from the creature, and it flew and began chasing after them, screeching. This creature pursued them into the city limits of Point Pleasant, and then as they approached the courthouse, it just disappeared. However, they still decided to make a police report because obviously they thought it was a bit weird and wanted to make sure that law enforcement knew about it in case it happened to someone else. The following day, the press released a story titled, "Couple See Man-Sized Bird Creature Something." Yeah, that is legitimately the title. That is some elite tier journalism right there. Over the next few days, more reports of this creature would come in. In fact, there was over 100 reports, and there's still reports to this day, which is absolutely insane. I really hope that one day I can go out there and try and find him myself, but I don't think I'd be able to report my sightings of him because I'd end up chasing him for hugs. Not long after, a woman named Marcella was walking to her car with her infant after she'd just been to visit a friend who just happened to live near the same munitions plant. And suddenly, from the gloom, she saw what would later be known as the Mothman's signature red eyes. She was so frightened, she literally dropped her infant child and ran back into her friend's house. I assume she picked the kid up and before running back in and just didn't, leave the kid out there to fend for itself. All of that would be hilarious and I would love that. But apparently people like kids, so they don't like it when you just do stuff like that. Weird. Over the next few days, more people reported similar sightings after local newspapers covered it. 2 volunteer firemen who saw it said it was a large bird with red eyes. One of the firemen actually said to the other, when he aimed a flashlight in a nearby field, its eyes glowed red like bicycle reflectors. The creature was dubbed the Mothman by the media as a reference to Batman and the villain Killer Moth, which is just so imaginative. Like, I'd love to have been there for that conversation. Like, oh, what should we name this giant moth that everyone keeps telling us about? What about Mothman? Like Batman, but a moth. So much imagination, these journalists. I actually found someone at West Virginia University who told reporters that the descriptions and sightings actually fit something like the sandhill crane, a large American crane that almost as tall as a man with a 7-foot wingspan and reddish colouring in its eyes, which to me is probably more insane than the idea of a Mothman, because if there's just 7-foot birds with 10-foot wingspans running around West Virginia, then that is some wild Jurassic Park type shit. Also, I don't believe sandhill cranes are actually native to West Virginia. I'm pretty sure they're actually native to Nebraska. So if they moved West Virginia to Nebraska at some point in the 60s, then maybe I'd understand it a bit more, but it doesn't add up to me, okay? Now, there are going to be a lot of silly parts to the Mothman because with him being a cryptid, it's something people make stories up about, and those sort of stories are hilarious to me. Anyway, so there is actually some people who believe that the Mothman was an alien. Yep, that's why I'm giving you the warning about the silliness. Around the time that the Mothman sightings were happening, people were visited by a man in black at the same time. I'm not sure it was Will Smith. I don't think he would have been old enough. I don't think he'd have been born by then, actually. But, there is a lot of places that actually talk about cryptids in general being aliens, which I think stems a lot from the fact that Cryptozoology is kind of a subgenre of paranormal, just like UFOs, but my personal opinion is that they are not the same thing at all. Although my source for that was the same people who made the show Ancient Aliens and Reddit, so do with that one what you. There is also beliefs that the Mothman was a curse brought upon the early settlers by the Native American people after they were forced off the land by the settlers. I mean, that one kind of seems more likely to me than aliens. I honestly don't know where the aliens perception thing comes from. It feels a little odd to me. Does that one? In December of 1967, tragedy hit the small town of Point Pleasant when the Silver Bridge on Highway 35, which connected the town with, I'm going to absolutely butcher this one, Gallipolis, Ohio. I hope I got that right. I probably didn't, but we move. The Silver Bridge, it collapsed, and unfortunately, this took the lives of 46 people, injured 9, as at the time there were 37 vehicles on the bridge, and 31 of them fell into the Ohio River.
An event that left so many heartbroken. December 15th, 1967. 55 years ago, the Silver Bridge collapsed during rush hour traffic. The bridge, which crossed over the Ohio River, connecting Point Pleasant and Gallipolis, collapsed due to a small defect on a single eye-bar in a suspension chain. Later, this led to important changes for the future of bridge construction, prompting the adoption of National Bridge Inspection Standards in 1968. But for families all over the tri-state, they lost loved ones that tragic day.
People claimed to have seen the Mothman lurking and apparently trying to warn them of the imminent catastrophe. However, this led some people to actually blaming the Mothman for the incident, and also giving him the nickname the Harbinger. This is another word I can't say properly. Dubbing him the Harbinger of Death, even though it was confirmed that the devastation was caused by an eye-bar fracture in the bridge's chain suspension.
Dedicated before a crowd of 25,000 on May 30th of that year, the design was completely original. Though the original plans called for a suspension bridge using spun steel bridge cable, the Silver Bridge instead pioneered the heat-treated eye-bar chain suspension. This is an actual piece of an eye-bar from the Silver Bridge. As far as anyone knows, it's the only one that still exists. The bridge was supported by a chain of eye-bars held together by a pin like this one. In 1928, the design was called unique and revolutionary. 40 years later, it could only be called tragic.
Prior to this event, there were people who claimed to have visions of and dreams predicting the disaster. However, I do want to mention here that there have actually been no reports of Mothman actually harming anyone. Now, this section is a bit of a strange one because obviously Ohio and Chernobyl are not exactly neighbours, but just stick with me on this one, okay?
Reports that the months and weeks leading up to the Chernobyl disaster, everyone at the plant were seeing a creature, the black bird of Chernobyl, a humanoid creature, 20-foot wingspan, glowing red eyes. And what does that sound like to you?
The Mothman, right?
The Mothman. When the power plant melted down, the people in the power plant couldn't handle what was going on. So the immediate response was to call in the military and have the military help. Now, the military came in helicopters trying to see what's going on. And while these people in helicopters were coming in, they were seeing something fly through the clouds. This thing had like a great wingspan, and it was haunting.
It has been said that back in April of 1986, in the run-up to the disaster of Chernobyl, there were actually warnings about the pending disaster, And I don't just mean all the warnings that were ignored by government and the power plant officials. Staff who worked at Chernobyl's power plant have actually said that a strange series of things began occurring when this started. This started when staff began seeing a strange and mysterious creature with huge wings and piercing red eyes. It was seen flying around the power plant. Apparently, the Ukraine was also moved to Nebraska for a bit as well. People who actually spotted this creature started experiencing interesting things around the outside of the plant as well. They began by having horrific nightmares, and they started receiving threatening phone calls that had absolutely nothing to do with them or anything going on in their lives. I can't exactly find anything to say exactly what the phone calls were about because sources are pretty limited and I don't speak Ukrainian. Yeah, I barely speak English. I said this in the last episode. Yeah, I don't know Ukrainian. As well as having encounters with the winged creature that would eventually be dubbed the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Just a side rant here, why do the media have absolutely no creativity when it comes to names? Anyway, the reports of these bizarre encounters kept going on and actually became more intense all the way up until the early hours of the 26th of April, 1986, when the fourth reactor at the plant suffered a steam explosion, which pretty much changed history as we know it, because this caused a fire which led to further explosions and, well, a full-on nuclear meltdown, which led to so much devastation and even the complete evacuation of the town of Pripyat, as well as the radioactive fallout, which eventually drifted across into a lot of Europe and even parts of North America. And it wasn't just Chernobyl that the Mothman allegedly warned us about, because there are even people who claimed to have seen him before major events in the world, such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and even 9/11.
World Trade Center. That's the same thing. What is that? It's over there.
Now, my personal opinion on this clip is it's definitely not real because, I mean, come on, that is just insanity. And if Mothman is real, he's probably not leaving chemtrails either. Unless that's how he tries to, you know, ruin the world and give us all, like, 5G poisoning and all that lot. I don't know what the chemtrails thing is. I try to avoid that side of the internet. I don't need flat earth in my life. I have a few more recent sightings to show you. But again, these are pretty much just funny to me. If you want to change my mind in the comments that these are more than just satire, then go for it. But I would need to see a lot of evidence, and it may just become content where I just sit here face palming at all of the evidence that you send me. So just be warned.
Holy crap, that was close.
These pictures, supposedly taken by a man who says he was driving along State Highway 2 in Point Pleasant, saw something jump from tree to tree. So he pulled off the road to take these pictures. The man declined an on-camera interview, but is adamant the pictures are real.
Now, this section is kind of silly, but it's something I find really interesting because I'm a massive fan of Fallout 76. But this game is actually based in Appalachia too. So Point Pleasant is actually on the map, and it's 100% where my camp is as well. I can literally walk about 100 feet into, not even that, about I'm probably about 50 feet from the actual town itself. But as Fallout is set many, many years ahead of our time and is after a nuclear apocalypse, the town of Point Pleasant is very different now. This version of Point Pleasant is actually inhabited by a cult known as the Cult of the Mothman, who may or may not actually worship Mothman, but that could be a video in itself. Every now and again, Point Pleasant is actually home to an event within Fallout 76 known as the Mothman Equinox, where you fight other cultists of the Mothman, which are known as the Dim Ones, or that's what they get called by the voice of King Julian from Madagascar. Anyway,
the Dim Ones have attempted to contain our light. Destroy their vines encircling each pyre before we proceed.
After you fight the cultists, you gather on top of the Mothman Museum and you use what they call emotes to try and lure him over. And when he does come over, you receive gifts from the wise Mothman. Anyway, in Fallout lore, the Cult of the Mothman attempts to summon him before the Great War in an effort to gain protection from the looming nuclear war. And they actually achieved it. Kinda. They caught a glimpse of him warning of a flood the following day. There are also different Mothmen. Anyway, either way, you have the wise Mothman, which is the main one. And he is the nice Mothman, the Mothman that everyone loves. There is also Vengeful Mothman, who is, as it says on the tin, pretty vengeful. He tries to attack you, and he comes up quite a lot in the Mothman Equinox. And then there is also a different Mothman who is my worst enemy, and he is known as Scorched Mothman. He just kind of, the only time I've encountered him so far has been in a specific quest line. It's hard for me to explain, so I will kind of just show you here with some videos of me doing not the quest, but me going through the area where the Scorched Mothman lives. I think there are more, but I currently cannot think of them, and I don't have the sanity to deal with Fallout Wiki. But I just wanted to throw this in because I find it interesting. In the Fallout universe, there isn't a bridge like the Silver Bridge, because the Silver Bridge was like the Golden Gate Bridge, where it's held up by suspensions and wires. And the one in Fallout is a truss bridge. However, Point Pleasant had a new bridge that replaced the Silver Bridge 2 years later, which became the Silver Memorial Bridge. So we can assume that maybe the same thing happened within the Fallout universe, and that's potentially the Silver Bridge. But don't take what I'm saying as, you know, the best lore descriptions of Fallout 76. I haven't been playing it for that long. I literally only played part of Fallout 4. I'm working on it. My lovely Crydonis got me into it, and now it's kind of an addiction. It is one of my 3 games that I play on rotation, which is Fallout, Sims, and Power Wash Simulator. I do occasionally play like Phasmophobia with Zach and his friends, but that's a rarity and it's not exactly a hard game to play. Currently, Point Pleasant is a huge tourist attraction, basically all about the Mothman. They are still super small with around 4,000 residents, and just as I mentioned in Fallout, they have a Mothman museum. That is part of the Mothman museum, and it is part of Fallout. They also have a yearly Mothman festival, which has tours, pageants, music, films, and even balls. But it's the biggest tourist attraction in the small town. Massive thank you for checking out the first full-length video over here. If you have any suggestions for what you would like to see in my next video, be it cults, crimes, cryptids, or even just something weird, and remember to like and subscribe. It won't cost you anything, except maybe your sanity, but if you had any of that, you wouldn't be here, would you? Bye, guys.